And we are live, folks.
Jolly good. Hello, friends. All well and above ground, I hope. Well, I am, just about.
Happy Tuesday.
Yeah.
Once again, our little Tuesday TeaFlix warriors.
Yeah, we look forward to that.
Absolutely. So today we're going to spill the tea with we're just beyond chuffed to have our guest on today. He's just unbelievable. So he's a 7-time Grammy winner. He's a world-renowned music producer, engineer, and mixer, born in Bristol, not England, but Connecticut, and based out of New York and Connecticut, the Northeast and New England. Frank was one of the first engineers to embrace digital mixing, which we'll get into and talk about. And his early credits include his first #1 album, Foreigner's Agent Provocateur, including the very famous I Want to Know What Love Is. Inside Information, which he also co-produced. Kiss's Lick It Up. He's done a lot of work with Carly Simon, the Bangles' Eternal Flame. We have Frank to thank for how that sounds. Courtney Love's Celebrity Skin, Rod Stewart, that Great American Songbook, volumes 1 and 2, and everything in between, from our friend Gerard McMahon, who may join us today, G. Tom Mack, to Korn. So I can't wait to get into this with Frank. So the crowd goes wild. And here he is now. Good morning, Frank.
Hi, Frank. Good morning.
Hi.
Come on down.
How you doing?
Good, thank you. You?
Good. Where are you calling from?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Okay, so it's definitely sunny there. All right. We have a little bit of sun here. So
spring begins tonight, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's a different day from usual because of leap year. It's usually the 21st, but it's 19th.
Spring really? So it is tonight. Oh, I didn't know
tonight.
that.
Yeah, sundown. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
So we'll be able to go and frolic outdoors shortly. So tell me, how did you have an aha moment, or had you planned all along from a child to go into the music industry? How did you get started? What's the genesis?
Well, actually, when I was a youngster, I was very interested in science, especially astronomy and physics. And I spent most of them up until teenagehood. I was going to be either an astronomer or a physicist.
Wow.
When I went to college, I developed a real attraction for nuclear physics, and so my major in college for the first couple of years was nuclear physics. And music was a sidelight. It was a great way to get girls, but it wasn't like I was impassioned with music. I did love music, but it wasn't like my calling. But in college, I formed a band, and we got more and more popular. And about the second year at UConn, the college I was going to, I got very depressed because I didn't feel like my calling was going to work, which was physics, because I had already been now 3 semesters in and came to the realization that in order to do the nuclear physics that I wanted to do, I would be in school another 8 years. You don't get to work on a particle accelerator your first year or second year in college. You've got to go through a whole lot of stuff. And I was just playing music, having a good time, and I wasn't ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
So the second half of the sophomore year, I met a professor in psychology who took me under his wing, and I moved my major over to psychology and because psychology seemed so much easier and quicker for me, I just wanted to get my degree, get out, and then I was going to take my band to New York City and see if we could get a deal, which is what I did. We went to New York, we got a deal. Lots of ups and downs for about 7 or 8 or 9 years as I tried to pursue this. I was getting near the point where, I was a singer-songwriter. My band split up. I became a singer-songwriter, got a record deal with Epic Records, and started making an album. But then Epic Records decided not to pick up the option for Cashman and West Records, which was Tommy Cashman and Terry West, who had done Jim Croce. They had signed me. And so that didn't look promising. And then my songwriting deal with Screen Gems came to an end. They didn't pick up their option. And I'm 30 years old in New York City without a job, no income. And my girlfriend and I, at my 30th birthday, had a big fight, and she threw me out of the apartment, which was hers. You know the songwriter deal where your girlfriend is the one that makes the money. So I was in New York with no place to go, nothing to do. And I remember going to Capitol Records once, a fellow named Mitch Schoenbaum, who was an A&R man there, and to play him some of my songs. And at one point, Mitch said, these songs, I mean, they're okay. I'm not nuts about them, but they sound great. And I says, what do you mean? Because I recorded everything at home on my little tape recorder, my demos. And he says, have you ever thought of engineering? And I said, no, I haven't. I'm a songwriter. Well, when this denouement happened in my life, I realized that I got to come up with something else. So I had done some songwriter demos and worked with some people at a little demo studio downtown called Right Track Recording. And I knew the owner there. And we used to talk about sound because I was fascinated by it. Being an ex-physics major, the concept of sound and how we hear and all was interesting to me, as well as having my degree in psychology. Obviously, music and sound are related to that. So everything started to coalesce into some kind of a picture. Wow. And I ended up talking to the owner of Right Track Studios, and I said, "Look, I'm 30 years old. I know I have good ears. I think I can engineer. I used to do my demos at home. Can I get a job here? But I'm too old to be an assistant for 3 years." Right. And he said, well, he says, I can't pay you much. I'll pay you $175 a week, but I'll give you a shot. Wow. So I said, okay. So 4 weeks later, I was doing my first dates on 4-track. After a month or so, I was doing 16-track work. And in 6 months, I was chief engineer at the studio.
Wow.
So I had obviously found, without ever realizing it, my calling. And I didn't pursue it. I was kind of pushed into it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe your calling found you. Maybe the universe just forced itself upon you, and there you go.
I've never tried to second guess it. One of my mantras is, and I don't know if I can say this, but fuck fear.
Yes.
That,
you just did. Yes. Great.
Okay, so that's been my guiding principle throughout life. Is there's when I ever thought of something that held me back, it almost always was fear. It wasn't anything other than that. And I said, this is not so. My whole career has been, someone asked me to do a live show with Hall & Oates, and I'd never done a live show before. I had to hell with it. I ended up doing, I was asked by PBS to do Bocelli in Central Park, to record that. And, it was a huge show with all kinds of stars, Celine Dion and David Foster and all these people, along with Bocelli and Tony Bennett. And I was in a truck a quarter of a mile from the stage because the truck wouldn't fit on the roads inside Central Park. And I'm recording the show, and I'd never done anything like that before. And the challenge has always grabbed me. That's not to say that I haven't had many sleepless nights and, and the occasional, I can't do this, but for the most part, I've always tried to push myself. So getting involved in this calling was serendipitous, I guess, is what you could say, but it changed my life. I mean, within a year and a half, I was working with Peter Asher, who I never could get my songs to. As a songwriter, I couldn't get my songs to Peter Asher. Suddenly, he's next to me at the desk, and we're working on the Pirates of Penzance.
Wow.
I then, a year later, had my first #1 hit with "I Want to Know What Love Is," and I never looked back. In fact, my whole life was writing songs up until that point. I have maybe 200 cassettes with song ideas and things that I've never once listened to since I started this. I've never written a song since I started this. It's
Interesting.
I guess it just turned out to be the way that I was meant to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Peter Asher and I were almost brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Peter Asher's sister Jane was engaged to my stepbrother Paul.
Yes, I know. I'm very familiar with all of that. In fact, it was my history and being with bands and stuff all revolved around early on the Beatles and that whole era. I was one of the Beatles. I wouldn't say I was a fanatic, but I fell in love with their music, and it was very Ringo Starr was an inspiration to me.
Yeah.
I think Ringo has been, up until recently, I think he's
Very
been
underestimated, hasn't he?
absolutely one of the most underestimated drummers. And our regulars will know we say this on the show often. I think that the subliminally, and you'll tell me physically and psychologically if I'm onto something, because Ringo's left-handed and Paul is left-handed, you have a left-handed rhythm section. It just made the band swing in a different way.
In a totally different, and I'll tell you, I have this theory, which is another of my sayings. It's chops, not choices. I mean, it's choices, not chops.
Okay.
And Ringo is the perfect example of this, because I remember many years ago, John Lennon was asked, if Ringo was the best drummer in the world. And he said, Ringo isn't even the best drummer in the Beatles.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that was the comment. And in a certain sense, that's the thing about Ringo was when I first started drumming, I saw Ringo and I said, I can do that.
Yeah.
Because I was just starting out at drums at the time, and there was nothing he did that I felt I couldn't do.
Right.
Unlike 10 years later, when I saw Tony Williams or Billy Cobham, I almost gave my sticks up because I said, I'll never be able to do that.
Right.
But with Ringo, it was like, I can do that. What I didn't know at the time, 10 years later, after drumming and trying, it wasn't about the chops. It was about his choices, about the feel that he put down, about the musicality of his fills. When you listen to something like A Day in the Life or A Little Help from My Friends or Strawberry Fields, and you listen to his choices of what he plays and how he plays it, that's the key to Ringo Starr. And he never disappointed. He always came up with something new and unique, just as George did on the guitar, just as Paul did on the bass, just as John did. They all contributed this uncanny ability to always raise the bar, and not necessarily in chops, but in choices, and coming up with things that under normal circumstances a musician wouldn't come up with.
Right. And, well, I mean, Paul was raised obviously by my dad. His mom died when he was 14, but there was always a piano in the house, and my dad was a pianist, and he had a band in the 19-teens and 1920s called Jim Mack's Band, and he was a play-by-ear piano player. What I think the Beatles did, and I think Charlie Watts fits in that same pocket with Ringo, he makes it accessible. They don't terrify you like Buddy Rich, like, oh my God, I'll never. Right.
Exactly.
But I think it's because they came from an unofficially music educated working class background, and they had no fear, like you say, and they were like, well, shit, let's give it a try.
And what's so amazing, there are for me as a drummer, I can say this because I was a drummer. There are really two types of drummers. There's the drummer, and then there's the musician who's a drummer. Okay.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying the drummer isn't a musician, but what
No.
I'm saying is Ringo Starr is a drummer, and he's totally focused on that ability, and is so deep into it. The naturalness of his feel and that left-handedness just brings to the fore this incredible vibe. Paul, on the other hand, is a musician who's a drummer.
Yes.
And he's thinking musically all the time, while Ringo's drumming is musical. I don't think he thinks in a musical way where Paul does. Paul turned the bass from a foundation to a musical instrument.
Yeah.
And Paul always had the ability to use that the traditional way and throw it out the window and go, you listen to some of his bass parts, and they're not bass parts by any stretch of the imagination. They're even beyond guitar parts. They're a member of the orchestra in a very fundamental and not just a holding the beat kind of way.
I had the honor of, when Paul first met Linda and brought her home to Liverpool, I was probably around 11 or 12, something like. Oh no, they married in 69, so I would be 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And he wanted Linda to see all of his old haunts in Liverpool, and we went down Matthew Street, and we went on the top of the Church of England Cathedral, and we went to the Ye Crack and all of this stuff. And I'm a kid just tagging along. And he happened to see, we were in Matthew Street, he happened to see a little old lady letting herself in to the Cavern Club. It was the cleaning lady. And of course, she recognized him. She's like, all right, Paul, do you want to come in and have a look around, And so he says, well, can we? And she said, yeah, sure. So there was the cleaning lady in the back washing the pint glasses, Linda and I sitting in the front row in this empty club, and Paul got up and played the drums. And he just was, recreating how it used to be in the old days for an audience of two. But he gave it his all. He gave, it was quite a moment.
No, he's our George Gershwin, really. Our generation's George Gershwin. He thought outside. He still does. Thinks outside the box, but also. When you get down to it, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, I can't imagine how many people right now in the music business are in it because of them.
Yes.
I don't know any musician, band, or what have you more influential and bringing music to this planet than they were. And it's really. I look at the music of today, and I like some of it. I don't like some of it. But all I know is I am so glad I was there during this, because we'll never see that again.
No, you're right.
No, I mean, the 60s, obviously, every decade, I think, has its own place in music history. But I think one of the most appreciated decades is when you were really doing, great stuff with Carly Simon, the Peter Asher decade, the 70s, right? People think of the 70s and they think, shag carpet, bell bottoms, and I Think I Love You, the Partridge Family, right?
Right.
But when you look at how the singer-songwriter, you mentioned Jim Croce, how the singer-songwriter generation developed in the 70s, I think we've created some of the most amazing music in that decade. But again, without the Beatles, would that have happened?
No Carly, no Joni, no, all those, and growing up, imagine, right now, if you look at the pop music world, it's relatively homogenized.
Yeah.
You look back at the 60s, and it's because of the Beatles' influence. There was no world music when I was growing up in the 60s.
No.
Okay. There was, but through the Beatles, we all became interested in world music. We became interested in jazz. We became interested in classical. We became interested. Soul music was on the other side of the spectrum, and that was also equally potent and equally important. And between the R&B that both rock and soul music were both developed from the R&B.
Sure.
That was something that influenced everybody, it was not just on the musical structure, but it was based on the rhythm and the groove.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Ringo picked up on, and one of the things that the Beatles picked up on, because they were huge R&B fans. I mean, so at the end of the day, that idea of groove and so forth that so moved the music of the 60s and 70s. And the 70s, you're right. You know, I mean, it was great artists in the 70s. You know, and one of my heroes, other heroes, is Frank Zappa. He was doing the most outrageous stuff, but all that came from these four guys in Liverpool who decided by their second or third album that staying the same way wasn't going to work for them.
Yeah.
Expanding every single time. There were albums that came when Rubber Soul came out. I said, "Wait a minute, that's not the Beatles. Is it? What am I listening to?" It was so you know. I've just seen a face, and I'm saying, "Wait a minute, that's the Beatles." And
well,
you know,
they gave permission later on to people. Not just like Zappa's, Karen in Edinburgh is just saying, you know, Zappa made some very interesting percussionist choices too. But I think the Beatles gave permission to people like David Bowie to just keep changing personas.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, they were still the Beatles, but, you know, then they did a couple of films. They did the Magical Mystery Tour, and they, you know, they had a go at anything because they could.
Fuck fear.
Absolutely right.
You got that.
Just go with it, go for it. And you know, and when George started introducing the sitar and things into music and bringing and one of the not unsung, but certainly George Martin's influence, bringing like his string writing for things like Eleanor Rigby and so forth, were just stunning and brought a new era to pop. And then with on Revolver, when Jeff Emmerich was one of my really good friends.
Oh, he was lovely. Great man. Lovely man.
I just when I talk about the emotion that Ringo and Paul create in the rhythm section, or the emotion that I try to create when I'm doing a mix, all that comes from Jeff. Jeff was the most emotional mixer I've ever encountered. He had a way, if you listen to any Beatles record from when he started with them, and you listen to the individual elements, Martha, My Dear, or In My Life, or Tomorrow Never Knows, or any of these tracks, or you know, the drums and A Day in the Life, you listen to each individual instrument and you say, that's nice. But he had a way of bringing, like the piano of Martha's My Dear. It just as a piano sound, I don't know, not the best piano sound in the world, but that coupled with the sound of the horns and the sound of the drum, and the whole thing just suddenly had an emotional thing that I don't. And look, all due respect to Giles Martin, I think he's fabulous, but I got to tell you, he doesn't mix with that emotional core the way that Jeff did. And there was something about Jeff's ability to bring sonically emotional elements together that I try to emulate, but it's impossible. He's one of a kind.
And you think all the time they were, in the early days, they were forced to wear white coats because they were engineers, you know. It was a lab. We had Jeff do a mix just right before he passed, actually. It was one of the last things he did for an artist, a fabulous artist. We worked with Nick Marischal, who had done a cover of Things We Said Today. And Jeff very generously said, yeah, absolutely, I'll mix it. So I actually, because I knew him as a child growing up, but as a grown-up, before the end of his life, I got to actually sit in a studio and watch him work. I think, to me, Jeff's mixes have some kind of an element of almost like a warm blanket. I can't describe it.
Simplicity, I was going to say.
It's like a hug. I can't describe it any other
Yeah.
way.
Yep. No,
I don't know how he got it, but there was
Well,
something in his brain
like-
that hooked
yeah.
it.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle with all the little squiggles and lines, and every piece fits perfectly in that little
Yeah.
puzzle. And there's something about it that I'm always, a lot of the time I'm going for the best sound I can, but he went for the sound that works, and
Yes.
and added an element to it that it sometimes it baffles me how brilliant his mixing was, and I'm so in awe and respect of the work that he did. It was just
That's
amazing.
great to hear.
I know. We
it's very nice.
loved on
I'll
Jeff.
tell you what I'm interested in asking you about. Broadway musicals. How did you get into all of that? Tell us more about it.
I always loved Broadway. Fun, when I was growing up in the 60s, and I didn't become a Beatles fan overnight. I became a Beatles fan over a course of a year or two.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with me and Brian Wilson. I wasn't a Beach Boys fan until Pet Sounds suddenly made me realize, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. But what was interesting was that while I was loving this, I was also loving Barbra Streisand. And and her Color Me Barbara days, and Je m'appelle Barbara, and those great albums. And so I didn't necessarily tell my friends that, I was a Barbra Streisand fan.
Dirty secret.
I was secretly in the room a Barbra Streisand fan. And I loved the Broadway. I loved the songs. And as I got more into music and learning about classical music and so forth, I became a true music fanatic. And so I used to I loved the songs and things like Oklahoma and My Fair Lady and things like that. They were such brilliant songs. And when someone like Barbara tackled some of these songs, it was just unbelievable. So as I was working on building my career, I started out doing rock music, and I also started out doing a thing called soca music, which is Caribbean music.
Okay.
And I did that for a long time, and but as my career started to get wider and wider, and then I started working with someone like Carly Simon. And she was totally interested, and she brought me this whole songbook of because her dad was friends with George Gershwin,
Sure.
and so I started really getting into Broadway, but not recording wise. And then I had an opportunity in 1992 or 93. I started working with Phil Ramone, one of the great producers of all time. And in fact, he worked with Paul on many things.
Sure.
And Phil was producing the Broadway music to Passion.
Oh, yeah.
By oh God, Senior Moments.
I know who you mean. I can't think of it either.
Yeah, no, I mean Sondheim, Stephen Sondheim.
Right.
Again, another Gershwin, just an one of my favorite writers, and just beautiful music. And I mixed that, fell in love with the show, got to meet Stephen, and once I was in the Broadway community thing, I started getting people to ask about, would you like to do this? So first I started mixing, but then I started recording.
Wow.
So by the mid aughts or something, I was producing Broadway musicals, and got to work with Monty Python's group for Spamalot, and got to work with Trey Parker and Matt Stone for the Book of Mormon, and they were the South Park guys, and also got to work with. I did both versions of Color Purple. I did the original Broadway version, and then 15 years later, the revival. And so I recorded Wicked, and I just fell in love. I love the show.
You got a Grammy in 2001 for the cast album of Aida, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that was with Disney. I've done a lot of things with Disney. I did Aladdin with them, and I did Aida, and a thing called Newsies. I've done a fair number of projects with Disney as well.
Right. Well, now, was Priscilla Queen of the Desert, that would have been an independent production, right?
Well, most of them were, except for the Disney musicals. All of them were kind of independent in the fact that they had their own record companies and stuff. But the show was a big show on Broadway, and I got to do that as well. Yeah, that was terrific.
And then in the mid-aughts, as you were saying, 2005, you were one of the founding members of the MET, Music Engineering Technology Alliance, which you still are today with 6 other luminaries. What was the genesis of that? Because I think Al Schmidt was also a founding member, wasn't he?
Al and Ed Cherney and Phil Ramone. For I don't know, mid 90s or so forth, we would all go to these trade shows, AES and NAMM and things like that. Yeah. And we all became fast friends. We weren't competitors. We were friends, and we'd see these folks at these AES shows and or NAMM and things like that. And we'd all go out and have a drink and just talk and tell stories and have a fine old time. And as well as bitch about the industry, the music is going to shit and the CDs aren't sounding good and the equipment is this and they're coming out with iPads and iPods and, MP3, we'd always do that. So finally, I guess Ed and Phil or Ed and Al or someone got the brilliant idea. Why don't we form a group of engineer producers, and let's put our imprimatur on this on the equipment and the music and so forth, and say, it was kind of like the THX certification for film. Yes. And so we started out like that. And then the alternate side of that was mentoring. We wanted to teach, and we wanted, because I mean, in my alternate life, I would be a teacher. I love teaching students, mainly because the person that saved me was I mentioned the psychology professor that took me under his wing back at college. I was going down not a great path, and he brought me back and got me excited about learning and got me excited about life and about my place in it. And he literally, his name is Dr. Michael Turvey at the University of Connecticut, and he's the professor of psychology there. But he changed my life, and that, when I look back on it, I say I would love to have that kind of a influence on someone else's life, a young person's life that's going down a different path, and suddenly I can inspire them to be to turn themselves around, and that to me is
gift, isn't it?
Amazing calling. So that would be my alternative. But in any event, that was another reason for the Met Alliance. And so since then, we've just gotten together, and early on, we started doing these Met Alliance sessions. We'd book out a recording studio on a weekend and have people come and join us, and we'd record a band. At the time, it was all 7 of us. We'd have 2 in each room, and in the 4th room it would just be one, like Elliot mixing or something like that. But we'd usually have 2 recording rooms, a mix room, and then another room. Oh, and then George and I used to do a room on in the box stuff. So And you could book the weekend, and there would be 4 sessions, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. And you would, all the people, there'd be 10 people in each group, and they'd revolve around the rooms, and they'd all get to see each person doing their thing. And so we did those once every year, once every couple of years, up until COVID, and then we had to stop. But
now you're back, right?
We're back. Yeah, we're back doing it.
I'll tell you what I was wondering, Frank, in your Storytellers Live events with your 6 other members of Mass Alliance, you talk about a project in Botswana. Tell us about that.
Well, that was it's not the kind of thing I get very often, but I was working with a guitar player on his album, Al Di Meola, and he had a good friend of his, Dr. Bradford Keeney, who was an anthropologist, and his wife, and he came to a session once, and while he was there, we were talking. I got to be good friends with him. He's very bright and very metaphysical, and we were talking and had some great conversations. And he brought up one day, he said, I'm going to Africa for 3 weeks, into Botswana, and because I'm concerned about the Bushmen losing their cultural heritage, because the Botswana government has come out with a law and an edict that all the nomadic tribes have to settle. They have to settle in settlements, and the intentions were good, which was, the kids weren't getting schooling. They weren't getting necessarily the proper health care. They weren't, so there was intentions, but as almost always happens with good intentions, they don't. They're
work, right?
It's not one way. It's you lose as much as you gain. So they were forced into these settlements, and Dr. Keeney was concerned that they were going to lose a lot of their cultural heritage, and so forth. They got into these settlements. So he says, I'm going there to document the Bushmen and the tribes, the various Bushman tribes. Would you be interested in joining? And I said, trick question. It was like, of course. So again, so I put together a little package, because this was 94, 95. We didn't really have the digital stuff we have now, which makes it a no-brainer. But back then, put together a package and went out for, we spent a week in Johannesburg, kind of like an armed camp. But then we went out into the desert, the bush. Yeah. They call it the desert, but it was really the bush. And just had probably one of the most magical experiences ever was seeing a tribe of that has been doing the same things for 2,000 years. They haven't progressed to electricity and plumbing and things like that. But I never saw a more joyful group of people in my life. I mean, and this wasn't just one tribe. We maybe ran across a half a dozen tribes, and the camaraderie amongst young and old, the emotional bond that they had to each other, because they depend on each other for their survival. It's like the what is it, the foxhole comment, no one's atheist in a foxhole.
Right.
But that bond between them, because they are dependent on everyone for their survival, and the joy and the lack of judgment, and just didn't matter whether, there was nothing, there wasn't the cool factor. It was they're all part of a bigger thing, something. And it was just amazing to see.
But they sing all day. What was the reference to? I mean, they live in a 2,000-year-old society, but I think you and I said the other day, just because we Westerners consider them primitive doesn't mean they're not sophisticated, right?
Okay. Right.
But they sing, and there was something you were saying in the Met Alliance Storytellers gig in Ridgefield. They'd seen something in the sky, and
there's a song we've been listening. I had been recording this stuff, and thankfully I got this on tape. I heard what sounded like they sang Apollo la da da la Apollo la la da da, and with beautiful harmonies, by the way. It wasn't like someone wrote this out for them. They all just sang in this incredible harmonies. I said afterwards through the interpreter, I says, I thought I heard the word Apollo. What is that? Is that the Greek god, or something? Because I wouldn't know that they'd know about that. And the interpreter tells me back as the young girl is telling the story, that they know the nighttime sky, like they know every star, and when they look up at it, that's their sky. Well, they noticed this traveler in the sky at night back when Apollo 11 was going to the moon.
Oh, my goodness.
And suddenly, and for about 3 days, they saw this thing going across the sky. And of course, they're nomadic. So apparently they finally came across some travelers who told them that thing in the sky was the Apollo 11 that went to the moon. And they wrote a song about it. And that was this song,
Just the connection between the old and the new. I mean, it's quite incredible to think that, there we are. NASA is sending men to another planet, and we still have men, women, and grandpas and children on this planet singing about watching that experience.
Well, and it was like, it's like that, the conceit that says, what happens if aliens came down to the planet and saw us? Would they treat us as primitive? And the thing is these folks saw it wasn't primitive or not. It was just magical. That's what it was. It's a magical thing. It's not. They're not trying to determine what it was or how it was or the technology behind it. They just enjoyed the mystery and the beauty of it.
Well, and that's kind of like the innocence of not just youth, but the innocence of non-corruptibility. They haven't been corrupted by TikTok and Facebook and all this other nonsense. They're out there living in the land. We're going to be involved shortly. There's a friend of ours in England, Barry James, who is working with a northern Australian tribe outside of Cairns. They've just declared a sovereign nation, and they're creating their own, infrastructure and everything. And one of the things is to preserve their language and their culture and their songs. And then one of the chefs that we represent is Choctaw, and he is going to school 3 nights a week to learn his native Choctaw language. So there's a lot of that. And then Dale Penner, who's Nickelback's producer, he just took off yesterday for North Canada, the northernmost part of Canada, to set up a recording studio for an Inuit tribe up in Canada.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
People are preserving these. My husband Martin's working on this thing called verifiedvoicevault.com to try and capture and preserve all of this stuff. So,
well, and now that we can, it's worth it. I mean, 20 years ago we couldn't do this, but now with battery and portable equipment and stuff, it's like this room here where I'm working in. I couldn't have done this 25 years ago. It wouldn't have been possible. I would have to work in a studio, but now I can do this here. So the wonder of this technology now is that we have the capability of democratizing this across not only people, but across geography. And that creates its own set of problems as well. As we said before, nothing's one-sided. There's always good with the bad, and TikTok and Facebook and those things are the downside of all this. But even those like in the what was it, the Arab Spring and so forth, that was terrific and helpful during that period. So you got to take it. You got to take the good with the bad.
I watched a fascinating interview by Tony DeCopel on CBS Mornings this morning with Vint Cerf and 2 of the other founders of the internet. who are, all getting up there now. They're probably in their 80s. And one of his questions was, so, the internet is being used for so much bad stuff with human trafficking and these porn sites and people faking, ripping each other off and whatever. Did you ever think that would happen? The day you launched from the ARPANET to the internet, how long did it take humans to start doing bad stuff? One of them said 5 o'clock the same day.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true. But you've got to look on the bright side. Always look on the bright side of life. You might know that one.
Oh yeah. No, I mean it's life's a piece of shit when you think of it.
When you look at it.
It's written in my will that when I pop off, I don't want a funeral. I want a cremation, and I want them to have a celebration. I want my ashes always to be on the top of the piano, and at the celebration, everybody has to sing, always look on the bright side of life. I don't want any of this hymns and crying stuff.
Right, right.
Celebrate life and enjoy it every day, which we certainly are today, having you here.
It's just a joy.
Fabulous.
14 years ago on Angie's 80th birthday, we had a dress rehearsal for her funeral. So her 80th birthday party was a dress rehearsal. And so
I'm still here at 94. The bitch won't go away.
No, that's a good idea, actually.
Isn't it great? And so everybody got to come and say what they would say at her funeral. And then people who couldn't attend made YouTube videos on a private channel, and we put them on the wall. It was hilarious. We had both her doctors here and a dentist, and the pharmacist came. We had exactly 80 people here for her 80th.
That's brilliant. You know what? I mean, how many times has someone said, I never got to say to my dad or my mom or what I wanted to say until her funeral, and now that's a terrific. Why hasn't that become a tradition?
I don't know. I mean, you can't really
tell Netflix.
You can't really market or patent it. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, that we never got a dime for. But hey, if anybody out there wants to go into the dress rehearsal for funeral party business, call me.
All right. Will do.
So you've got events. I want to just make sure that our viewers know you have events coming up in April, the end of April, at the Power Station Studio in Connecticut, which is this in-session where you get to meet. It's yourself and Elliot Shiner, and the wonderful Nico Bolas is going to be there. And you're recording the new London Big Band, right? So you're going to have a lot of microphones.
A lot of microphones. This is usually we've had like a 4 or 5 piece rock band or jazz group or whatever. This will be the first time we're doing something this large, but I'm really looking forward to it because one of the bands. I'm a big fan of a site here in America called TCM.
Turner Classic Movies.
And I love watching the old 30s and 40s movies.
Yeah, I do.
One of the best parts is people go to a club and there's not a DJ there. There's not a record there. There's a live big band playing while they're dancing. And so you go, and then when you go and hear the sound that these big bands make, with the great arrangements, whether it's Glenn Miller or Louis Armstrong, whoever the band, Artie Shaw, and it's just unbelievable. And to hear this live, and everybody had that almost every weekend.
That's right.
And, when I was growing up in Bristol, Connecticut, there was a place called Lake Compounds, and Lake Compounds had a band shell in Bristol. It was a theme park, but it was at this band shell. What's his name? Another senior moment. It
happens. Your hard drives.
Not Lionel Hampton. Not Lionel Hampton.
Anyway.
All right. Anyway, the great big band from the 50s and 60s would play there like every month, and and you don't get to hear that kind of stuff anymore, and almost everything.
I used to go ballroom dancing every Friday and Saturday night in Liverpool. there was the Grafton Rooms, and then a bit later, the Locarno Ballroom, and they all had big bands.
Yeah.
And it was where you went to get picked up. In fact, I met my first husband. He asked me to dance, and that was it.
That was the end of the story.
So
So back to the Sean Nelson Big Band. If you guys are living anywhere near Waterford, Connecticut, you can go to metalliance.com, and on the events tab, you can go meet Frank and Elliot Shiner, another Grammy-winning maestro, and the wonderful Nico Bolas, 27th and 28th of April. And you can find out more about that at metalliance.com. And also then in May, you guys will be doing the same thing, but a whole bunch of you in Nashville at Blackbird Studio. That's May 18th and 19th session. And I think there'll be a whole bunch of you, right? 5 of you, 6
There'll
of you.
be 5 there. It'll be
So it's
see,
George Massenburg,
Massenburg, yeah,
Jimmy Douglas, Sylvia Massey, Nico Bolas, and Chuck Ainlay.
right. And we did that. We all 7 of us did it last year at Blackbird, but this year we decided let's try, because I've always wanted to do something at Power Station New England, which is a phenomenal studio. Anyone who ever used to work at Power Station in New York is just blown away by the fact that this is an exact duplicate of Power Station New York. So you walk inside and you literally feel you're in Midtown Manhattan. It's really quite remarkable. And I've done sessions there, and it's a phenomenal sounding room. So we're really looking forward to doing the big band.
So anybody that's watching worldwide who has music fans, friends in Connecticut, that's coming up quick. And there's only very limited places. There's only like 20 places. And I think it's almost all sold out right now. So if you go to metalliance.com, that's where you'll find out. And then also, just briefly, you also have a new, I would call it product, called The Storytellers, which is you 7 crazy people telling stories and all of that about the old studio days, right?
Oh, I love the video of the last one. It was great.
It's under wraps right now, but it's just incredible. So if you see The Storytellers coming soon to a town near you, it is one of the best nights in rock and roll and hip hop and Botswanan music and comedy and all of the above, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Just absolutely incredible. So make sure you guys bookmark the MET, Music Engineering Technology Alliance.com, and follow them on Facebook and Instagram, because the lovely Samantha will be updating all of that good stuff.
Samantha's wonderful.
Yes, she's absolutely great. Well, the whole team is wonderful. Everybody's great. Everybody's great. So I don't know how many TeaFlix you've seen, if any, Frank, but we always end our very special guests get their own limerick to sign them off, you see. So since we couldn't rhyme with Filipetti other than spaghetti, we went with your first name, because Madam has a limerick book out, and she's
wow.
Yes. So and all our regulars are like, limerick time. She's actually retraining ChatGPT on the proper limerick format. So
good. It needs some help. Yes.
Oh, they do.
So here comes your Helio and a 1, 2, 3. This TeaFlix we hung out with Frank, whose ears should be kept in a bank, with Grammys galore and hit songs we adore. For his audio talents, give thanks.
I buggered that up, didn't I?
That's fantastic. I'm glad it wasn't like, and he needs a shower because he stank. No.
That's two. Yes. Second show.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I know how busy you are. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do TeaFlix with us today. Everybody head over to MET Alliance. That's MET Alliance.com. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram. And thank you. So it's just truly an honor to have you on. And you've led the way, because now we've managed to talk George Massenburg into being next week's guest.
Okay.
Look out now.
Excellent.
Fabulous. Excellent. All right, my darling. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks again.
And we'll see you all of a sudden.
And
bye-bye.
And Angie, it's a pleasure meeting you. You were so great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's all smoke and mirrors, I assure you.
And spackle and wine.
Spackle and wine, yeah.
Good.
I'm like an old crocodile handbag.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Bye.
God
all.
bless. Bye-bye.